to this presentation entitled Unveiling the Secrets of Integrations. This is specifically for LMS integrations. I'll mention that abbreviation several times. My name is Tasha Biesinger. I am here at Oregon State. I am our LMS product manager. And so I'd like to give a really brief overview of what we'll be talking about today. I'm going to go over our newly updated OSU integration review process, and then I'm going to go into 3 steps in great detail, including what we call the technical review, the functional testing step, and also accessibility testing. So a little bit about Oregon State. We have about 36,000 students, 4,700 faculty, 2 campuses, 11 colleges, 12 experiment stations. Our learning management system, or LMS, is Canvas, and the team that runs that is called Learning Platform Services, or LPS. A big part of managing the LMS is actually managing the vendor tools, the integrations. So when we think about the LMS, which for us is Canvas, it provides the core functionality for faculty and students in their online course environments. Vendor tools can provide very specialized functionality, for instance, for this subject or this college. These 2 tools, these 2 systems are connected through integrations that allow the vendor tools to use web services through the LMS's API, and that API stands for Application Programming Interface. It's just a fancy way to talk to each other. These integrations allow things like the tool being able to get the roster information or who the people are from the LMS in that course and essentially create that roster in the tool. It also allows the tool to post or put or create assignments in the LMS or connect the 2 systems, and then also to push grades from the tool into the LMS. All right, so somebody comes along and says, we want to add this integration to the LMS. We want to use it. Well, what now? And at OSU, our review process obviously starts with the request. We want this thing. The very second step after getting the request, it goes through governance and security review. This step involves an advisory committee that includes a lot of people around campus and also the Office of Information Security. If everything looks good at that step, we move into this technical review, and I'll talk about this in much greater detail, so I'm not going to give details right now. And then if the technical review looks good, we then go into integration testing. So integration testing involves 2 pieces: functional testing, does it work? What does it do? What is the experience? And then accessibility testing, is this tool accessible? If everything looks good at this point, we then prepare our documentation and comms plan. How are we going to roll this out so that faculty know what's coming, how it works, so that they know where to come to get support? And then finally, the tool is released into our production Canvas environment. The tool is now available for faculty to use and students to use. All of these last steps are performed by our LPS team, which includes our Associate Director, Lynn Greeno. We have 2 LMS administrators, David Rios and myself, and then we also have 2 product managers. Oops, that will be fun. 2 product managers, Wei Zhang, and also myself. Okay. So, as I mentioned, these 2/3 steps are the ones that we're really going to dive into today. So when we move into the technical review, we start by thinking about what these integrations need to do. And for the vast majority of integrations, the most common tasks are pulling roster information or enrollment data from the LMS into the tool so that they can create that course roster in the tool. They also need the ability to create or link assignments between the 2 systems. So the LMS and the tool have that connection, so students can click on the assignment in the LMS and magically get to the tool, the assignment in the tool. And they also need to be able to pass those grades on those assignments from the tool back into the LMS so that the course total can be calculated properly in the LMS. All right, so all of this generally happens through something called Learning Tool Interoperability, or LTI for short. And this is an industry standard for LMS integrations. And essentially what this is a set of rules that everybody has agreed to. All of the LMSs, it doesn't matter what your LMS is, and all of the vendors. And they've all agreed to build their tools in such a way that it doesn't matter if you're trying to use Gradescope and Blackboard, they will connect. If you want to switch it over to Canvas, they will connect. So everyone has agreed to build their tools in this special way, and that is what LTI is. As I just mentioned, the LTI, this set of standards, allows the tools to perform those actions then through the LMS's API. So everything can connect, and they can do the things they need to do. LTI 1.3 is the newest set of standards, and it specifically improves security and privacy over the older LTI 1.1 standard. LTI 1.3 is relatively new for everybody, including vendors, which means a lot of people need to learn new things in their development. As I'm going through this, I may inadvertently make it sound like the vendors that aren't building well are bad. They're not necessarily. Some of them are just learning, and they have not learned enough to do things quite the right way yet. So in advance, I apologize on behalf of all those vendors that are still in that learning phase. Okay, so for us specifically in relation to LTI 1.3, we have found that replacing LTI 1.1 integrations with newer LTI 1.3 integrations is non-trivial. It is a lot of work. It is not seamless. It is essentially taking away an old thing and plugging in a new thing. So there is a lot of work in doing these switchovers. So as vendors are building a new 1.3 to replace their older 1.1s, when it comes time for you to do these switches, it's a lot of work. We've also found that LTI 1.3 integrations must be installed by an LMS administrator. With LTI 1.1s, faculty could conveniently just integrate their own integrations at their course level. They didn't need anyone else. So these two things, at least for us, we found significantly increased the administrative burden of these LMS integrations. You require significantly more work. All right, so vendor integration instructions are actually a combination of vendor wants and needs. They will often present everything as a need, and you must do it this way, and you must name it this thing, and you must do this and this and this. But not all of those are actually must statements. And you are concerned about your own institutional wants and needs. You have your own governance, policies, and security to worry about, and also your user's experience. So while vendors are out there trying to make money off of their great product, you are concerned about your institution. So this brings us to our technical review. One of the first steps that we take as part of our LPS team. And the main questions that we ask are, what permissions or access is the vendor asking for? How much of their data, or how much of our data are they trying to get? Are the permissions that they're asking for expected? And do they align with what the tool is actually doing? This step is performed by the LMS administrators. It's very, very technical, and you'll see some of that technicality show up on the screen in just a minute. Or a second, here it is right now. There is a lot on this screen. Don't try to read it all. We'll actually be walking through step by step. But at least for Canvas, this is the documentation that Canvas provides for LTI 1.3 permissions. And so we'll start with these first two. The first one reads, can create and view assignment data in the gradebook associated with the tool. The second one is actually a much more narrower scope of that first permission. The second one reads, can view assignment data in the gradebook associated with the tool. So, excuse me, if you have the first permission, if you've given the tool the first permission, they don't actually need the second because they already have view permission. So I generally ignore that second option. Most vendors don't ask for it anyway. So essentially, if you give a vendor tool this first permission, It allows the tool to create and view assignment data, which is essentially saying it can create an assignment, give it a name, it can set the points possible, it can set the due date, and that external tool launch URL is essentially saying that's the connection so that when you click on that assignment in Canvas, you automatically jump over to the vendor's assignment. All right, so most tools need this. The next two permissions that I'm not going to read in their totality is actually all about submission data. So these are points earned by the students, and sometimes vendor tools can also send over the date and the time that the score was generated or modified in the tool. So again, something the tool generally needs to do, pass grade information to the LMS. This fifth permission here is all about retrieving user data. And this one, the extra words are pretty important. It's associated with the context the tool is installed in, which essentially means they can get user data for this course where the tool is being used. They can't get user data from your entire LMS. So this allows the tool to create that roster so it can pull the data from the LMS, put it into the tool, and it can figure out who the teacher is and who the students are, which is an important part of creating a roster. All right, so looking at these four permissions, and then looking at these most common tasks of the integration, only 4 LTI 1.3 permissions are required to do these core tasks. And one question that we ask when we're going through this technical review is, if they're asking for more, why? Why are they asking for more permissions beyond these core things? Is their tool actually doing something more? So for instance, some tools will ask for this last permission here, which is can look up account information. Account information, at least in Canvas, is all about your college and department structure. And so I asked the question, why does a tool need to know about our college and department structure in order to manage course stuff? I can envision a vendor wanting to know that information so that they can figure out which departments are using the tool, not using the tool. Maybe it will help them prioritize their marketing, where they're going to spend their resources. But do we as an institution want to give them our data so that they can do this? We may not care, we might, but now that we know, we can ask these questions and we can push the vendor. Please tell us more about why you're asking for this permission. And if we don't like it, we're just not going to give it to you, and will your tool still work? So it puts us in a better position of power when we're negotiating with these vendors. All right, some integrations will ask about things called API developer keys. They'll say, please give us an API developer key. Well, this is asking for permissions beyond the guardrails of that LTI standard that the industry has all agreed to. You know, these are how tools connect. In Canvas, at least, there are two types of API developer keys. There's an unscoped developer key and a scoped developer key. When a key is unscoped, and when you try to create an unscoped key in Canvas, you get this very big and scary, and it should be scary, warning. Because you are essentially, if you create an unscoped developer key and give it to the vendor, they now have access to all endpoints, which means they can do all actions possible through the LMS API. That is a lot of power. Are you willing to give this vendor the ability to delete all of your courses, to delete all of your accounts, because that's what you're giving them if you give them an unscoped developer key. So, big red flag for me, personally. On the other hand, you can enforce scopes on a developer key. And essentially what this means is you'll create the developer key, but then you have to go down the list as the administrator, the LMS administrator, and check a little box and say, well, they can have that permission and that permission and that one. The vendor generally will give you a list and say, these are all the permissions we want. But again, it's on you to go through and ask the question of, why do you need this permission? And are we comfortable giving you this permission? So the two permissions that I've checked right here, enforceable. This top one is get enrollments from a specific course. They already have this ability through the LTI 1.3 key. Why do they need an API key for this? And my argument would be they don't. The second permission up here gives them the ability to get enrollments specific to a person. So they can now look at this person and see all of the courses that this person has. Why in the world does this tool need the ability to see all of the courses of a student? And there are some vendor tools that may need this information. So I'm not here to say that no vendor ever should need this permission. But if it is a simple tool where it is just passing grades back and forth between the, one course and another course, they definitely don't need this permission. So anytime you're creating a scoped developer key, the burden is now on you to really go through and see what permissions are they asking. Does it make sense in the context of what their tool does? And that's a lot of work, or it can be a lot of work. All right, so a couple examples. We had one vendor who asked for an LTI key, LTI 1.3 key with those 4 basic permissions. They also asked for a scoped API key, but it was very limited. They said we only need 2 additional permissions on this API key. When we asked them, why do you need this API key? Why do you need these 2 specific permissions? What is your tool doing that needs that? They were actually able to provide a very clear explanation of the connection between some specific functionality that they were actually building. It was beta functionality, but this beta functionality was expanding some things, and they could clearly show why these 2 permissions were required for this functionality. But it now put us in a position of, well, it's beta, so maybe we don't actually want our faculty using your beta product, because, beta. But we were now able to decide whether we wanted to create that API key or not. But because they could clearly demonstrate the need, it definitely built some trust, our trust in the vendor, as opposed to vendor number 2, who asked for an LTI 1.3 key with 5 permissions, which, isn't horrible. They asked for the normal 4 plus that accounts permission. However, they did, in their integration instructions, ask for an unscoped API key. Granted, they did have a little footnote that if you're not comfortable giving us an unscoped API key, you can technically create a scoped key. And here's the incredibly long list of permissions that we want. When we asked them, why do you need all of this? They could not provide that information. They could not sit down with us and show us one-to-one what the functionality was. A lot of the permissions were redundant, and some of them just seemed excessive, and they couldn't explain any of that. Obviously, at the end of the day, one of these we had a lot of trust in, and we view them as a quality vendor. The other one, not so much. All right, so there is also something called admin API token. So an LMS administrator can create a token connected to their own account. Essentially, anyone that has that token is acting on behalf of that user. Some vendors I have seen ask us as the LMS administrators, give us one of your tokens so that whatever we do, it actually looks like you're doing it. Please, may we have one? Or they'll ask and say, hey, will you create a user that is an administrator and then give us the token, and that will be for us. This is the same as an unscoped API developer key. You might as well give them all your money while you're at it. Okay. So that was the technical review. It's all about permissions. What permissions are they asking for? Are the permissions appropriate? And if not, can we scale them back? If we don't give them these permissions, will it still work? Or are we comfortable with the risk by giving them these extra permissions that we don't know why they need them? All right, so then moving into the integration testing, if the technical review looks good and we don't see any, no-go forwards, flags, we move into functional testing and accessibility testing. This part of the process is generally performed by our product manager, so Wei Zhang and I. We are very fortunate at OSU that we have a completely separate Canvas instance that is not connected to our SIS. It is not connected to anything. We use it explicitly for integration testing, and we have fake instructors and fake students. So during this testing phase, we do not need to expose any of our institutional data to these vendors that we're just trying out, testing out. I am so glad we have it. All right, so one of the first and probably easiest pieces of the functionality testing is tool name and placements. What is the vendor asking for? Are they necessary and or unusual? Are they asking us to give it a funky name? Are they asking us to put it in a weird spot in the LMS? And I'll talk a little bit more about all of these. Can we, instead of using their placements that they're asking for, use placements that we know our faculty are familiar with? And this is generally where our faculty go to find tools. Can we use those instead? So, for instance, with tool names, the vendor documentation often just says, when you're creating your XYZ, put in this value here, and they give you something. So, in this example, they want us to name it tool name, best tool ever. We may not like that. Maybe it's too long, and we're just going to stick with the basics and call it tool name. We can do that. There is nothing in their documentation that says their tool will break if you don't name it this special thing. And I have yet to see a tool that won't work when you name it what you want to name it versus what their documentation says. When it comes to placements, at least in Canvas, there are two very common placements for tools. One is the course navigation menu, which is shown over on your left, my right. And it's the name of the tool currently in my mock-up is course navigation, so that's a horrible name. Don't actually name things course navigation, but that's the placement right there. The other, at least in Canvas, is assignment selection. So in the course menu, you can quickly get to the tool by clicking on the course navigation, or if there's a specific assignment, it is connected to the tool, and so you can click on that assignment. If the vendor's asking for anything other than these two, we generally question why. There are some other locations for some tools. If any of you are familiar with Kaltura, Kaltura makes a lot of sense to be placed in other places because it's a much larger system-wide tool rather than it's specific for this course or that course. So these are the things where we just pause and ask questions. Oftentimes what the vendor has is fine and we're good going with it, but we can customize this to what we need and what our faculty and students are looking for. Okay. So in functional testing, obviously, we're checking, does the tool actually work? Does it do what it says it does? I have yet to see a tool that just fails. So at least vendors are good at making their own tool. This is the step where we ask the question of what if we remove these permissions that we don't like? They've asked for 5 other permissions on an API key. We don't like 4 of them. What happens if we just take those permissions away? Does the tool still work? So this is the part where we get to start playing around with permissions and taking things away. We also, at this point, start thinking about, well, what documentation do we anticipate we'll need for our faculty and students? What parts of using the tool or getting from the LMS to the tool are a little bit tricky or funky? So we can start building out that documentation, getting screenshots during this functional testing. And then we move into accessibility testing. There are 2 main things we look at. The first is, does keyboard navigation work? Can you navigate the entire process from starting in the LMS all through the tool without touching a mouse? This is not always possible. What about using a screen reader? If you are using a screen reader, can everything about the tool be heard through a screen reader, including button labels? When you're navigating, well, I should put up this pop one. If you are using these 2 things at the same time, so no mouse, just using the keyboard, is the screen reader telling you where you are on the page? When you get to a button, does it tell you that you're on a button and what the button does or what the name of the button is? This second or this third bullet point here, do they work at the same time, is actually a really critical test. Because one, they both work individually, but sometimes when you put them together, it kind of goes down in flames. And there are a lot of students that land in this bucket of needing to use both of these things at the same time. A really big question is, how does the vendor respond when you report these accessibility issues? Because you will never have more influence over a vendor when they are trying to sell you something. If they don't respond well to accessibility issues that you report before you add the integration, they will not respond well after you've integrated it. Do they provide alternatives? So sometimes there are just things about tools that we cannot make this thing accessible. It just isn't possible. But when that happens, do they provide an alternative activity that is accessible? It's not quite as cool and fancy or slick, but it still conveys the same information, still conveys the same activity, but in an accessible way. Because at the end of the day, your institution, is responsible for accessibility, legally and all otherwise, including in these vendor tools. And if you don't require these vendors to make accessible tools, you end up paying the cost, whether that is in people hours by your disability access office trying to figure out a way to make something accessible out of an inaccessible thing, or by more costly legal lawsuits. I guess all lawsuits are legal. Okay, there is something, One Ed Tech was formerly known as IMS Global. They've actually just released their accessibility rubric. It is all about gauging how willing or how committed vendors are to accessibility. I know it's a really long URL, but if you have a moment to go take a look at it, it is not going for 100%. Is this tool 100%? Because it is hard to make anything 100% accessible, but are they responsive to accessibility? Are they constantly looking for accessibility issues and fixing them? How committed are they to working through those accessibility challenges in their tool? All right, so if everything looks good at this point, we have essentially answered the questions of where we want our name or what we want our names and placements to be. So we choose the things that work for us. We've also had an opportunity to investigate those permissions that we weren't very comfortable with, and we could either just get rid of them, say you can't have them, or we can have those hard conversations of, are we willing to accept the risk for this tool because of the benefits we get from the functionality? But we now are in a position to ask those questions. And then, of course, we can make sure that our vendor is committed to providing that accessible tool. So at the end of all of this, each integration actually involves quite a lot of people. I mentioned the governance bodies, our information security group, our LMS team, or LPS team, and a bunch of campus partners that we didn't even mention. I don't know how many of you are familiar with our eCampus unit on campus. They are excellent partners for our team in particular, and we often partner with them on these integrations. But at the end of the day, after all of this work, we end up with integrations that are appropriate, that are customized for our institution and are accessible. And that's really what we want, so that our faculty and students can just use a cool tool. And that, now I open it up for the scary questions that you may have. Yeah. Good question. So the question was, I'll repeat it because it's being recorded, right? So will I share my slides, or is our process? I don't know that we do have our documentation for our process anywhere online. I will ask, but I'll also ask if there's a way to share slides, because I'm happy to share slides. Yes, so my email is a little bit long because my last name is, so let's see, so my email address at Oregon State is tasha.biesinger@oregonstate.edu. First name is Tasha, and then the dot, and then Biesinger is B as in boy, I as in igloo, E as in elephant, singer. But also it's in the program, so first dot last. But yeah, thank you. I will also look into how to share slides, because I'm happy to share them. So yeah, thanks for the question. Yeah. So our small little team is in our academic, so University Information Technologies, Academic Technologies unit. So we are a very technical side. One of the campus partners I didn't mention is Center for Teaching and Learning, and they are all about pedagogy. So our team, we pick up a lot from eCampus and CTL on, best practices for teaching, but we are the technical side of academic technologies. Yeah. Well, phew, so far so good on easy questions. Anybody else? If not, then we'll just,
Have you had vendors that you've had to say no to? How many?
We have not been counting, and I don't know that we ever give a hard no. We just say not now. We'll come back to you in a year. That one particular vendor that I shared, vendor 2, we're like, yeah, well, we don't like this. And they respond. So it's funny, that particular vendor had 4 integrations that they wanted us to do, and they all had the same steps, and they all wanted ridiculous API keys. We said, we're not going to move forward with any of these. They responded and said, oh, well, we're working on another one, just one integration that will work for all of them. And so right now we're like, great, when you've got that one, we will revisit this. So I can't say that we've ever said no and, we generally just say, we'll come back to it.
So what is it that brings them on your radar? So like a professor saying, I want this.
Yeah, and in particular with the LTA 1.3 I mentioned previously, at least at our institution, so I think this is not common. At our institution, faculty have the ability to just go out and get an LTA 1.1 integration and put it in their course. We don't know what tools people are using. We are actually looking at trying to close that down, because not all tools are, great tools, and they don't always protect data. But the data loss that would happen, it's much more limited than entire institutional data. Not that that makes it better, but at least the risk is lower. With LTI 1.3, that is no longer possible. So as these vendors are starting to talk to their faculty and they're like, oh yeah, we've got a new updated integration, it's awesome. You just need to get your Canvas admin to install it for you. So we are starting to see lots of our faculty who have been using these, I'll call them stealth integrations, and they're starting to come to us and say, hey, I was told I need to talk to you for this integration. And we're like, oh. So yeah, it's kind of put us in a pickle, because we're like, well, and this is where the governance piece and the security piece really come in. Like, are we going to do all of this work for one faculty member to use this one tool? Does it actually bring value? Can more people use it? So, but it's, a lot more work, because we're not talking about the ones that are university integrations. We are now getting all of these one-offs. So really great question.
Budget? I didn't see that in there. That's got to be a part of it.
Yeah, for sure. So anytime it's an institutional tool, in that governance step, there is conversation of who's paying for it. So I mentioned eCampus. eCampus has a lot of tools that are eCampus only tools. And so they will often, they decide, they're like, we really want this tool. We've got the budget for it. We're going to do it. We have to do the integration for them, but they've got the money. We do the technical stuff. We apply the integration to their sub-accounts in Canvas so that they have access. So I definitely skipped over the budget part, because I fortunately have nothing to do with that. I just know that people talk about it and have to figure it out. But yeah, that's part of the governance piece for sure. Yeah. Any other questions? eCampus does, yes. I don't recall if we've updated that one to 1.3. That one went back and forth, so I don't recall if we did it last summer or we're doing it this summer. But yeah, we've got VoiceThread.
Accessibility issues with that?
We did not actually do the accessibility for that. eCampus did, because that was an eCampus only tool. And so I don't know that they reported back. Either it was good enough and they had alternatives. They had worked out their own alternatives. So yeah. Yeah. So there were the hard questions. Thank you. We have. So Kaltura 1.3 was probably one of our first ones. That one, we did lots of rounds of testing, because it is such a big integration and not just, little course level things. So we did multiple rounds of testing and double testing, triple testing, what do you call it? We also did need to partner with Canvas InStructure because old Kaltura embeds had old Kaltura code. And so we actually had to say, pretty please, InStructure, will you do this mass search and replace for us? Which we fortunately, again, had our testing environment where we could mock all this up and test it out before the real thing. So that one was a big one and a scary one. That one, aside from all of the really double, triple checking everything, that was probably one of our smoothest transitions, probably because of the extra 11 carat got in the testing phase. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yes. So before we got our standalone Canvas environment, we did set up a sub account, but any of those permissions where it's like can get information outside of the course, they still had access to everything. So yes, you can definitely do that. We've also tried to use the test and beta instances in Canvas in the past, but we have found, so one thing, I don't know if you recall, it's probably been several years now when the browsers started like just destroying everything about third-party cookies. Like third-party cookies just would not work. None of you have nightmares about? I have nightmares about that. We had, just about that same time, we had applied a vanity URL for our Canvas instance. So before that, our URL was oregonstate.instructure.com. After our vanity URL, it was canvas.oregonstate.edu. And if backend data, so if I had something embedded and it wasn't the oregonstate.edu domain, then the browsers would block it, and people were not very familiar with how to allow third-party cookies, but not all third-party cookies, because allowing all third-party cookies is a security risk. So how to let these ones go and not those ones, it kind of came to a head. And so our sub account would work because it had that vanity URL so that we could do some of this third-party testing, third-party cookie testing. Test and beta didn't work because they did not have the oregonstate.edu domain. Our standalone, our test environment, we specifically applied a vanity URL, which cost a chunk of money, but that way we could make sure we were also testing for this third-party cookie browser crap that seems to change every other year now. So yeah, so yes, you can for sure in a sub account, but yeah. Yeah. All right, any other questions? Okay, well, thank you very much for attending, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.